Welcome to everyone who is online now. We'll just wait another minute or two to let more people gather, and then we'll get started. Thanks. Well, good afternoon to everyone who's joining us from Bahrain, and good morning to those of us in the United States. Thanks for being with us today for this Discover America Week EXIM International Buyers webinar. I want to just go over a few of our upcoming events and give you a little bit of information before we get started with our guest speakers. I'm Mary McGinnis, the Executive Director of AmCham Bahrain. And our next event is going to be on November 10th, maybe the next slide, yes. And it is a part of our series of helping our members in the business community learn how to do business with the US government. And so this one focuses on doing business with the US Navy here in Bahrain and the region. And people who attend these periodic events always find them very, very useful. Our other event is November 17th, and this is for all of us political junkies who will want to look back with an insightful look at our elections, which will have concluded by then, we all hope. And so these can be registered for on our website at amchambahrain.org. So please go there to find the link. I would like to just do a few housekeeping notes. We want to encourage as much interaction as possible. So we encourage you to send your questions throughout the event. We'll hold the Q&A until the end after the speakers have finished. But you can send your questions throughout. And if you have any technical challenges, please send an email to info@amchambahrain.org, just as it's written on the screen. And the AmCham team of Bree and Reem are here to help solve any of those problems. And I thank them ahead of time for making this webinar possible technically. It's my pleasure to introduce AmCham Bahrain's president, Qais Zobi. He is the senior partner of Zobi Partners and legal consultants, a family law firm, the first local law firm to be established in Bahrain, and a regional presence within the GCC and the MENA region of top tier clients. Qais,
yes,
please.
Thank you very much, Mary. I appreciate your introduction. And I would like to welcome everyone who is with us this morning or this evening to this virtual webinar. The American Chamber of Commerce in Bahrain is pleased to partner again with the US Embassy to support the annual Discover America Week celebration and highlight American companies, brands, and opportunities. I want to thank our speakers today and for their time and expertise, Ms. Sharon Koenig from EXIM and Mr. Edward Bajan from Boeing. We look forward to hearing from both of you, and I hope I stated your names correctly. Thank you to the US Chamber and to the US Bahrain Business Council for their ongoing support. AmSham believes and promotes U.S. exports, U.S. jobs back home, and we are pleased to play a role in helping U.S. companies be more competitive and expand their market into Bahrain and the region. We appreciate EXIM's attention and service. When we proposed the event, they jumped on board. So it's much appreciated. Many of our members are companies that want to start or increase their business opportunities with the US, and today's topic will help them better understand how they can work with US companies and EXIM to use the available trade financing tools and resources to help expand their imports of US goods and services. AmSham Bahrain is fortunate to have an excellent working relationship with the US Embassy, not only during Discover America Week, but throughout the year. Brian Flory, the Economic and Commercial Officer, sits on our board, and we collaborate often to provide the best service to US companies in Bahrain and all companies interested in doing business with the US. It is my great pleasure to introduce US Chargé d'Affaires Maggie Nardi. Maggie came to Bahrain as the Deputy Chief of Mission a year ago and stepped into the role of Acting Ambassador, Chargé d'Affaires, this past July when Ambassador Severell departed. Ms. Nardi has served 25 years in the Department of State, including positions in Jerusalem, Croatia, Turkey, and the Balkans, El Salvador, and Poland. AmSham appreciates Maggie's leadership and her active support of the business community and AmSham members. I turn the page to Maggie to give us a brief. Thank you very much. Maggie? Thank you
guys for the warm introduction, and thanks to you and to Mary and Bree and Reem for organizing this, and to our friends at the Export-Import Bank and Boeing for joining us. I can tell you that government of Bahrain officials ask me pretty regularly about EXIM interest in the market and whether they might pay a visit. And so they were very pleased that we were holding this webinar as a way to possibly introduce new companies to the opportunities that EXIM can support. This, Kais mentioned that we have Discover America Week, which is something that this embassy does, as well as embassies around the world, for 1 week a year to promote American companies and products that are already in the market where we're living. However, this year we have also done a number of things, including 3 webinars about the opportunities in Bahrain for those who are not here, or those who may be working here but want to expand their business. We believe that the opportunities that remain are very significant. In 2006, Bahrain and the US implemented the first of only 2 free trade agreements in the region, and in the subsequent 14 years, bilateral trade has increased threefold, from about 782 million to almost 2.5 billion by the end of last year. And we believe that there's still a lot more opportunity. US companies are playing a role in many major projects in Bahrain. In the new airport, which is about to open by the end of the year, which will triple or quadruple in a number of the passengers that can come through. There have been at least 3 large US companies that have participated in that. There are companies that are also working on the design element of the new King Hamad Causeway and lots of other projects. And we believe that there is still a good deal of potential, and so we welcome interest. Bahrain has a very friendly regulatory environment. They have a streamlined registration and incorporation process. It is, as an island nation of 1.5 million people that is used to being on a trading route from its inception, it's very welcoming to foreigners. So it's also a very easy place to live. And a number of companies have based their regional headquarters here. So I think there are lots of opportunities for companies. And the role that EXIM can play is with companies and projects big and small, which I actually didn't realize. I had thought that it was primarily for large sort of infrastructure projects, but it's much broader than that. So EXIM supports US exporters and customers with buyer financing, export credit insurance, and access to working capital, big and small. And there are a lot of capital purchases potential here, whether it's gas turbines, MRI scanners for the new American Mission Hospital. There are a lot of opportunities. And so if you're at all interested in entering the market or expanding your presence and need access to this kind of backing, I encourage you to stay and listen to the experts from EXIM and see what potential might be there. And Ryan and I are here in the embassy willing to help you, as are Kais and Mary at the American Chamber of Commerce. So please do reach out to us if you have any questions following this webinar. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kais.
Well, thank you very much. I think we can go ahead with our program, and I would like to invite Sharon Koenig to welcome her and invite her to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kais. Let me take a moment just to introduce Sharon Koenig and just to say how much we appreciate working with EXIM. You and your team have been wonderful. When we first suggested this idea about this topic, you guys responded with great enthusiasm, and it's just been great planning this together. So Sharon is the Managing Director of the Eastern and Western regions with overall responsibility for business development with EXIM. She has over 35 years of experience with EXIM Bank's products and advising exporters, bankers, and the trade-related business community in international risk mitigation and trade financing techniques. Sharon and her teams are dedicated to working with exporters and lenders to increase exports of U.S. goods and services and providing access to pre-export working capital, buyer credit financing, and export credit insurance. And she's going to explain to us what all of that means. But we also have with us today Regina Gordon, a member of Sharon's team, who is EXIM's Deputy Managing Director for the Eastern region. And she has focused on small businesses and helping them export their products as well. And as was said, AmCham is committed to helping American businesses find a market in Bahrain and in the region, and using the EXIM tools will be a great way to do that in finding their foreign buyers. So Sharon, let me hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Mary and Guy. Very much appreciate it, this opportunity today. So we're very pleased to address the AmCham members and prospects. And so let's get started right away in our program to talk about EXIM Bank. In hopes that everybody knows who we are and what we do, but just in case you don't, I want to make it clear that, of course, EXIM Bank is an independent U.S. government agency. We were started back in 1934, and we've got regional export finance centers and staff around the country of the United States to help our exporters with their export transactions. So you can see the different offices that we have here, and my colleague Regina is based in our New York office. Our overall mission at the end of the day is to create and sustain U.S. jobs through export. So everything we talk about today has to have an underlying trade transaction to get started with EXIM. Our goals are as follows. We want to minimize the risk of export transactions for U.S. exporters. We also want to level the playing field. As you know, EXIM Bank is the United States ECA, Export Credit Agency. And of course, every industrialized nation around the world has an EXIM Bank. And so we are here to level the playing field and make sure that the exporters of the United States have the same tools available to them as other exporters do around the world. We're also here to supplement commercial financing. We are here to do what the US commercial banks cannot or will not do. So that's the basic premise of our functionality. So let's talk for a couple minutes about export challenges for US exporters. Obviously, the big one on their mind is getting paid by foreign buyers. Many foreign buyers would like open account credit terms. And so to have their credit sales insured by our insurance policies provide the exporters the comfort they need against non-buyer payment due to commercial or political risks. And as you'll see as we progress through today's program, we offer credit insurance in various formats. Another challenge, as I just mentioned, is that buyers want credit terms, whether it's a brand new buyer or an existing buyer that is being sold on cash in advance, and now they're going to need more terms because their business is getting larger. Our insurance incentivizes exporters to extend open account credit terms directly to foreign buyers so that they can get the time they need to sell the products in their local market. Also, an exporter's insured foreign receivables can be added as collateral with their commercial bank here in the States to give them more cash flow. So on the next slide, we see here that there's a couple more challenges for US exporters, and one of them is that they need cash. They need pre-export working capital in order to purchase or manufacture US products for export. So EXIM Bank has a program to address that, which we'll be talking about in a couple of minutes. And finally, the last item is that buyers may need term financing for the purchase of capital equipment. So this is a very important piece of today's webinar for exporters that want to sell capital equipment into the market, and buyers need 2, 3, 4, 5 years to pay for it. We call that buyer financing or term financing, and we have a way to make that transaction happen so that the buyer is able to get multi-year financing at US interest rates. Next, please. Thank you. So how we support US exporters, just to sum up, is we offer the exporters can offer competitive credit terms to foreign buyers and therefore increase their sales. The exporters from the US can improve their cash flow with pre-export working capital product that we offer. We offer a guarantee to a commercial bank who makes that loan to the exporter. And finally, we can assist an exporter in arranging multi-year payment terms for their foreign buyers when they purchase capital equipment made here in the US. And yes, before I get the question asked, I will mention that that is for new as well as used equipment. Next, please. So I just want to point out that, as Mary did in her comments, which I greatly I appreciate, that EXIM Bank is not just for larger companies, it's also for smaller companies as well. And in fiscal 19, and I'm still trying to get the numbers for fiscal 20, which we do have, but in fiscal 19, almost 90% of the authorizations EXIM Bank processed were for SBA-defined small businesses. So I think that's one statistic that's very important for everyone to realize, that EXIM exists to help all companies, large, medium, and small. And there is no company, no transaction, no deal too small for EXIM Bank to support. So we'll take a look at a couple of eligibility requirements. For exporters, the company must be in business 3 years at least. We can go to do work with companies that are in business for 1 year with certain extenuating circumstances. But by and large, we like our exporters to be in business for at least 3 years, have financial statements or tax returns that show their activity for that period, and of course be registered with Dun & Bradstreet, having a DUNS number, so that we will be able to obtain a credit report on the company to see how they are operating. In addition, for short-term credit insurance and working capital, the products must be of US origin. And we define that as an individual product. Each individual product, each pen, for example, has to be at least 50% US content, including labor, excluding markup. So that means on a cost basis. And for medium-term, multi-year repayment tenors, you'll see that the US content increases along with the OECD guidelines up to 85% US content. For foreign buyers, we also like to see that the buyer has been in the business for at least 3 years and hopefully in the same line of business for those 3 years. have financial statements to support their activities, also be registered with Dun & Bradstreet, and be able to provide us with, of course, the financial data on their company, but also US trade references. You know, we do like to see, ideally, that a foreign buyer has had some trade experience with some customers, some businesses here in the United States. So EXIM Bank's products, as I like to say, cover the full spectrum. On the left side, you can see we've got pre-export financing for US exporters. This is a loan that will provide exporters with the working capital they need to obtain the products for export. On the post-shipment side, EXIM Bank offers export credit insurance to exporters, guarantees to commercial banks who might make a loan directly to a foreign buyer to purchase a US product. And we're not going to be talking much about this today, but we also offer direct loans. These are largely for infrastructure projects that are backed by a sovereign government. Very large projects such as the construction of a desalination plant or a power plant. So those would be direct loans directly to a sovereign entity. So we won't be talking much about those today. We're going to be talking more about commercial private sector buyer transactions. So let's talk for a minute about the working capital loan guarantee. Again, this is for a US exporter. It's for a guarantee to a US commercial bank, which makes a loan to an exporter so that they can either purchase a finished US good or buy the raw materials necessary to manufacture a finished US good for export. And we also can support services such as consulting services or engineering services. The loan proceeds can also be used to collateralize a standby letter of credit if they need to post a bid or performance bond. And usually in a case like that, we and the lender will only require that LC, letter of credit, to be collateralized at 25% of the face value of the LC. So the working capital loan assists smaller and medium-sized companies, as I've mentioned before, to obtain the products that they need to sell overseas. EXIM Bank provides a 90% guarantee to the lender, which makes a loan to the exporter. Right now, we have an option that the loan guarantee can go up to 95%. That would be on a case-by-case basis for an additional fee. The loan can be set up as a transaction-specific loan, meaning that the exporter needs the funds just for one contract or one transaction, or it can be set up as a revolver, a revolving line of credit that the exporter would have access to draw down on to obtain working capital for purchasing raw materials or finished goods for export. There is no minimum or maximum amount on the loan, but of course I'll say that the loan amount has to be able to be serviced by the exporter. They have to be able to service the debt that they're looking to take on in this particular loan. The loan supports advances made against all export-related and potentially export-related inventory. And by the way, that includes work in process. And most banks, when they make loans, exclude work in process. They will take the inventory, they will take into consideration the raw materials and the finished goods, but work in process is excluded. But under EXIM's working capital loan guarantee, we do allow the inclusion of work in process items. And the advance rates are up to 75% on inventory and up to 90% on foreign receivables. One more slide, I think, on working capital, that is that it is fully collateralized. The personal guarantee of the owners or any owner with 20% equity or greater will be required to attach personal guarantee. There is fees that are involved in this, the application fee as well as exposure fee. Our fees are charged to the lender. After all, the lender is our customer. We are providing a guarantee to them against the exporter's default on the loan. So technically the lender is our customer. You can see some of the fees here They vary whether the lender is what we call a delegated lender with EXIM or a non-delegated lender. And of course, the interest rate on the loan itself is negotiated between the exporter and the lender. So this is just a summary chart. I'm not going to go line by line, but I did want you to see in the pink shaded area, that's the items without a guarantee from EXIM. And in the blue shaded area on the far right would be with EXIM's guarantee. I just call your attention to peruse line by line. The big one, of course, is in the middle on the top category for inventory. As I mentioned, work in process. In the pink section, without a guarantee, the bank is going to advance nothing. But with an EXIM guarantee, that's added into the eligible collateral and increases from 0 to 75%. So the next section down is the export receivables pledged as collateral. And as you can see in the bottom line, on the very bottom, the grand total, without an EXIM bank guarantee, a bank would advance $760,000 in this example, but with an EXIM guarantee, with the increased percentages and the inclusion of WIP, the available cash to the exporter is 1.65 million. So a sizable difference. So let's shift gears for a moment and then talk about the actual sale to the foreign buyer. As we all know, in international trade, there are many different types of sales that can occur. And the first one at the very top you see is open account. You can see that open account is the highest risk to the seller because they've put their goods in air or on ocean and they've cut an invoice and they have lost control of their product and they are hoping that the buyer is going to pay the invoice in full faith as agreed through the purchase order. So open account is high risk to a seller, but very low risk to the buyer. In the bottom part, we'll get to the middle in a moment, but the very bottom one is cash in advance. And that, of course, is very low risk to the seller and high risk to the buyer because the buyer has paid for the products in advance and they don't have the products at all. In the middle are documentary collections such as cash against documents or site draft documents against payment. Letters of credit, whether they are paid at site or whether they have a tenor attached to them. So there's all different kinds of ways to conduct international trade. One of the things that we are trying to have our exporters understand is that open account sales are going to increase their business and give their buyers the flexibility that the buyers need on their side to sell the products and then in good faith pay the exporter. Next, please. One of the ways we bridge the gap with these payment terms, with the high risk and the low risk to the sellers and the buyers, is to offer a product called export credit insurance. Export credit insurance is a very simple concept. There's got to be an export from the US. It's got to be on credit terms, and EXIM Bank will insure it. It's not a guarantee. It's an insurance policy that the US exporter or a lender can actually purchase to protect themselves. So you see here the three benefits. The first one is risk protection, that the exporter is protected against non-payment by the foreign buyer. And it is also a sales tool because sales on open account are going to overall increase the size of the exporter's business. And as we mentioned briefly previously, these insured foreign receivables can be added into the exporter's borrowing base with their bank. Uninsured foreign receivables are too risky for a bank to lend against because they can't collect. But once they're credit insured by EXIM, the bank will be more willing to add those into the portfolio. So what do we cover under our insurance policies? The exporter is covered against both commercial and political risks. Commercial risks are those such as the buyer's insolvency, bankruptcy, and default. Protracted default means the due date comes, the due date goes, and there's no payment. We also protect exporters against non-payment due to political risks, war, revolution, insurrection, civil commotion, cancellation of an import or an export license, And of course, transfer risk, which is that the buyer has made their local currency deposit with the central bank, but the central bank is unable to convert to US dollars. So that is also a risk that we cover under our insurance policies. We have two types of credit insurance. The first one is short-term credit insurance. Short-term means that it is basically a consumer durable. Credit terms up to 180 days, or we can go 360 days if it's a piece of capital equipment or bulk unprocessed agricultural commodities. We have several different types of insurance policies with different coverages. The coverages range from 90% to 100%, again, depending on the type of policy that is selected by the exporter, the products that are exported, and the classification of the buyer. Are they a private sector buyer or is it a sovereign buyer? And again, all of our policies include both commercial and political risks. For exporters, we have three basic categories of policies. The first category is a multi-buyer or entire portfolio policy. So an exporter can come to us and insure all of their sales on credit terms around the world. Generally, those policies insure at 95% coverage. For small business policies, meaning for exporters which meet the SBA definition of small, there will be no first loss deductible. All of our multi-buyer policies are pay as you go, so the exporter only pays premium on what they ship when they ship, so it is very cost effective for the exporter. We also have a policy where we will allow the exporter to select certain countries to be included in their portfolio. I call this a negotiated portfolio. We are going to want to make sure that the countries we're presented with do represent a reasonable spread of risk for us. That policy will also cover 95% coverage. There will be a deductible. And of course, again, it's pay only as they ship, pay the premium on what they ship when they ship. And the last category of insurance policy we have is a single buyer policy. So an exporter can come to EXIM Bank and say, I only have one transaction in Bahrain. I want to insure it's going to sell products of $450,000 over the course of a year, and I want to insure just that transaction. And so we can certainly do that. And that policy will cover 90% with no deductible. We do have a couple policies I just wanted to highlight very briefly that are for SBA-defined small businesses. We have some nice incentives for these customers of EXIM Bank, and that is that we have a policy for relatively new exporters or exporters that haven't sold that much yet, and we call that our express policy. And then we also have a small business multi-buyer policy, which provides certain enhancements such as no deductible. So we do have some products that are specifically for small businesses. We're very keen on helping as many small businesses as we can and have these products to help them because, of course, the small businesses of today are the large businesses of tomorrow. Again, on our multi-buyer insurance policies, I'm not going to get into too much detail. This just tells you how the premiums are based. Some of the policies for small businesses are based off of a rate schedule. For the larger policies, we're actually going to calculate a rate based on the risk that is presented to us. I just want to point out one thing I neglected to mention, and that is we do offer 98% coverage for bulk unprocessed agricultural commodities, regardless of which insurance policy is selected. So this just highlights the short-term single buyer policy. It's priced off of a rate schedule. There's no application fee. It's issued for a period of a year and it is renewable. We can move ahead so that I don't take up too much time, and I wanted to get into this particular section right here. So let's talk a little bit about buyer financing. And I know we've got many buyers from overseas and from the Gulf region. And so I wanted to talk about how EXIM Bank supports the sale of capital equipment to foreign buyers. And we do that through two programs, the credit insurance and the loan guarantee. So if we can go to the next slide. So medium term is defined as a repayment term between 1 and 5 years. So whenever you hear medium term, that's the general rule behind it. It's generally used for buyer financing for capital equipment to creditworthy foreign buyers. The buyer's going to have to put down a minimum cash down payment of 15%, and then the balance, 85%, can be financed. And generally it's financed by a lender. This product applies to amounts of $25 million or less. Next, please. So let's talk briefly about insurance versus guarantees. Please remember that guarantees are offered only to a commercial bank, not to an exporter. An exporter themselves can decide that they want to carry the receivable. Maybe they want to sell a crane, it's $2 million, the buyer wants 3 years, and the exporter is strong enough financially to say, that's no problem, I'll carry that receivable for 3 years, I'll just come to EXIM Bank to credit insure it. So an insurance policy would be available to an exporter if they want to carry that receivable. It's also available to a lender, a financial institution. Guarantees are available only to financial institution. And you can see here that insurance might be a little bit cheaper than a guarantee. The tenor is identical, 5 years. It can go exceptionally to 7. Generally, we keep it to 5 years. And so I just wanted to point out the difference between the insurance product and the guarantee product. For medium-term financing, you can see here the benefits. For the exporter, it's risk mitigation on the transaction with the foreign buyer. For insurance, we provide, and for the guarantee, lender is provided with up to 5-year financing at US interest rates, okay? We cover 100% of the remaining 85, and we can add in some local costs up to 30%. And on the bottom, the costs are a cash down payment by the buyer of at least 15%. And the interest rate, again, is negotiated directly between the lender and the foreign buyer. So even though under a medium-term guarantee, the lender is our customer, the interest rate is negotiated directly between themselves and the foreign buyer with whom they are going to create a promissory note. Next, please. We do follow the OECD guidelines on medium-term financing. And of course, that relates to the amount of the cash down payment. We cannot lower that. 15% is the minimum. The maximum repayment terms are guided by the OECD, as are the principal payments, starting points, and exposure fees and interest rates. So just wanted to point out, without getting too far into the weeds, that we do follow the same guidelines as all of the other ECAs around the world when they are providing a medium-term financing model. The exposure fees for medium term are determined by all of these factors you see here: the country risk, the percent of coverage, and the various drawdown periods, the tenor of the credit, the fees financing, the fees that are being financed, and of course, most importantly, the general credit risk of the borrower. For us to consider a transaction for a buyer finance model, we do need an application, and the lenders that we work with are very expert in providing us with this information. I would say for the buyers listening in today, the most important thing to know is that if you're looking for a bank to make a loan to you to buy US products, the bank is going to first and foremost want a credit report on your company and of course financial statements. So if you would be aware that you should have those at the ready so that the financial institution can make their credit memo and get that over to EXIM Bank so we can review the transaction for our support. Okay, sweet. We can just keep going. Yeah, thank you so much. So this is just a finance model, a very basic model that I wanted to show to illustrate these OECD guidelines and the cash down payment. So if the transaction is $1 million transaction, The cash down payment has to be the minimum 15%, which is $150 US. The financed portion would be $850,000. And let's just say the exposure fee that we're going to charge the lender is 3%. So that would be an additional $25,500. The lender may have other fees, so it's important always to inquire what the all-in cost is and what those fees are going to be. So you can see here the total financed amount in this fictional transaction is $875,500. For the medium-term insurance policy, we can issue that directly to the US exporter, as I mentioned before. It goes directly to the foreign buyer. So we're protecting the exporter against semi-annual installments made by the foreign buyer under their full tenor of the loan. So if they're buying a crane for $2 million on a 3-year term, then the buyer would be required to make 6 semi-annual installments on that transaction. We could just actually move to the next. You can see here that this is the model. It just shows how it works. We can just keep going and add to this if you can, please. Thank you so much. So you can see on a guarantee, it's a little bit different because there's a financial institution that's going to be involved. And the financial institution technically makes the loan to the foreign buyer. But the foreign buyer never sees the money. When the exporter presents shipping documents to the financial institution that the products have been shipped, the financial institution cashes out the exporter at 100%. So the buyer never gets the money, but the financial institution creates a promissory note and the buyer is going to be required to pay back the loan over the course of the 3-year term, if that's what it was. EXIM Bank also offers long-term financing. These are for very large items, over 25 million, large items such as aircraft and project finance. I didn't really want to spend too much time on this today because the transactions are not as many as we see on the short-term side and certainly on the medium-term side, but I wanted to let you know and to give you the full picture of EXIM Bank's breadth of financing, such as Boeing, which I know is a speaker, enjoys some of these products as well. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention quickly a couple of restrictions that we have. Our charter is given to us by US Congress. We cannot support any military or defense related products or obligors. That means even if you're selling buttons to the Department of Defense, we can't support that. We do have certain exceptions for humanitarian reasons and so on, drug interdiction. The US content we already talked about, that is something that must be adhered to. We publish the countries where we do business. There's about 180 of them around the world. We publish them on our website, so please check that out. For the medium term and possibly for more so for long-term products, we also want to identify what type of adverse economic impact this transaction might have on the United States. So our engineers are usually looking at things of that nature. For long-term transactions, goods will be required to be shipped under a US bottom, on a US bottom rather. So MARAD guidelines, Maritime Shipping Administration comes into play. And the last one would be additionality, which means EXIM Bank needs to know and be convinced that our support is needed, that it will not go forward by a commercial bank without it. And that speaks back to one of the very first slides that I have that said, we do not compete with the US banks. We're here to do what they cannot or will not do. Again, take a look at our country schedule on exim.gov to see what countries we support. And finally, next slide, my contact information. And I also want to give Regina's phone number. Regina's phone number will be 917-826-5642. Her email will be Regina, R-E-G-I-N-A, .Gordin, G-O-R-D-I-N, @exim.gov. And thank you for your attention today. It's been a pleasure to be able to share with you the information about EXIM.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was, for someone who doesn't normally pay attention to this type of information, you kept my interest. I learned a lot, and I just thank you very much for a very clear presentation. Just so everyone knows, we will be sharing this presentation with you after the event. So it'll be easy for you to make references to and have the follow-up contact information. But I want to remind you that if you have any questions now that you'd like to for us to ask during the Q&A, please send those to us in the chat. And I want to introduce Jennifer Meal now, who serves as the U.S. Bahrain Business Council Executive Director in the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Turkey and Senior Director for Middle East Affairs, supporting programming and policy formation across Egypt and the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. I'm very glad to have Jennifer with us today. She has, and the US BBC and the Chamber have been great supporters of AmCham, and we always appreciate collaborating. And we certainly appreciate and thank you for making the arrangement for Boeing to come to speak with us today so that we can hear the perspective of someone who has used these EXIM tools and how they have benefited. Jennifer?
Great, thank you so much, Mary, and a big thanks to AmCham Bahrain, Kais, as well, and also on behalf of U.S. Chambers, U.S. Bahrain Business Council, and our co-chairs, AWS, West Point Home, and Al Zayani Investments. We want to thank you all for all your work during this time, as well as the U.S. Embassy, led by DCM Meg today. The Discover America Week is always a special time, and we're really delighted to see the Embassy and the AmCham carry this tradition forward, even in this hybrid format. Within EXIM, EXIM is of course a very important instrument for US companies doing business abroad. And when we put in a call out to our members, we heard back from GE that they were very proud to be the first transaction in 2009 since the formation of the FTA. So in agreement with all the parties here, we'd love to help facilitate more of these transactions. And about a year ago, together with Kais and Mary, we visited EXIM Bank and had a meeting with board member Judith Pryor. And one of the opportunities that came up that maybe we can discuss more in the discussion session today was how to get Bahraini banks and the strength of Bahrain's financial services involved in EXIM financing, either through letter of credits or other mechanisms, as a way to stimulate the local economy and, of course, continue with EXIM's mission to support U.S. exports. So with that, today, it's our pleasure to introduce Boeing, who's been a great partner of Bahrain and Gulf Air with the arrival of the 787s last year. And Boeing is represented here today by Mr. Vaskin Edwards, who's Managing Director for Middle East, Africa, and South Asia of Boeing Capital Corporation. And in his capacity, he provides arranging, structuring, and financial solutions to customers of Boeing products. And he most recently was the global head of aviation and transport at National Bank of Abu Dhabi before his current role. So he has a lot of great experience in the region, managing a portfolio of about $25 billion. And before this, he also worked at Lloyds Bank in London. So a lot of great financial experience, regional experience to couple that with, and of course, experience with EXIM. So Vaskin, we'll turn it over to you for your remarks. And thank you again to AmCham and to Boeing for this opportunity.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. Hope everyone can hear me. First of all, thank you for the invite. I think as Mary had put it forward as well, some very interesting comments from Sharon, which, you know, really resonated extremely well with myself. Yes, acknowledged, as Sharon had said, we are perhaps at the extreme end of the financing channel, looking at very large ticket deals, you know, in excess of $150 million per asset sometimes. So this is a very important subject for us. And I think it's, you know, not beyond all of us to realize the market is very challenging across the globe. And EXIM is a fundamental partner and has been a fundamental partner to us And in times of challenge, and we saw this if we go back, and it doesn't seem that long ago, but the financial crisis that we experienced globally, sort of 2008, 2009, 2010, US EXIM was a fundamental aspect and element within our financing. And up to 30% of Boeing's aircraft were actually financed by US EXIM. So you can see that the partnership there is incredibly important. Now, one of the things I would say, and there is a protocol exactly has been put forward by Sharon about how important the process is that we follow with US EXIM. And we are under what is known as the ASU. There's an aircraft sector understanding, and this is a protocol that we have to follow. And as Sharon had sort of described it eloquently earlier, this levels the playing field. We all have to follow a similar practice to other ECAs. But what I like about the US EXIM approach is a very sophisticated team. And I think Sharon had said that, and that is a very welcome commentary, because we've found that we are dealing with experts. You talk to people on an equivalent level who understand regional disparities, regional differences, and also they understand the collateral. Our deals are asset backed. So that is a very fundamental consideration for the banks who are the beneficiaries of receiving the US EXIM guarantee. That understanding of equipment is always going to distinguish a very sophisticated financial model from others. And that's where we've always had the benefit with US EXIM. And I would like to just reiterate one other thing that Sharon had put forward in terms of that cost of capital. And we'll come on to this piece in a bit more depth, if it's okay, is that cost of capital with the benefit of US EXIM support is noticeably better than just a straightforward commercial financing for many, many of our customers. That distinguishes an EXIM deal from others. Particularly today, we are going through a number of challenges. The banks in certain sectors have got what I would say is quite a significant exposure to aerospace. And as a consequence, by having the ability to bring in US EXIM, what we are actually doing is giving the banks an alternative credit risk. And that to us is absolutely fundamental. So from our side of things, we look at the opportunity that US EXIM brings every time to our customers. It brings the customer an opportunity to have a funding diversification source. That's tremendously important. It brings expertise in understanding equipment, jurisdictions, and following a very systematic process. And the way that we work with EXIM, which I think has proven itself time and time again, we follow a very structured process of understanding how EXIM need to progress and how our customers need to go forward. And what we try to do is meld those two things together, and we will support on behalf of a customer. And I think Sharon had said it there, that you have to interface with the banks. That's where Boeing likes to position itself, is that we act as that interface. So we take a customer's requirement and we know what we have to do in terms of our sale and what EXIM will need. And so we will work very extensively in pulling together information. We'll prepare information memoranda. We will sort of facilitate meetings with US EXIM, and we'll actually work on roadshows together as well. And that's fundamental. And that kind of hand in glove harmony really, really makes a very effective deal process. And I think that's some of the commentary that's come across through here, is that there is a defined process, it's systematic, and it's the benefit of many, many years of experience. And I think, as we go through this period, unfortunately, with as we've had with the COVID, we have to have partners who have an understanding of different markets, of nuances, and ability to stand head and shoulders above some of these challenges. And so from my side of things, from a Boeing perspective, we have an extremely active dialogue with US EXIM on a daily, weekly basis to discuss transactions. And today we're talking here within Bahrain, we're talking within the Gulf, but we talk on a global basis with EXIM. So it's a super opportunity for us today to articulate, hopefully from our side of things, how much we value this partnership, how much EXIM bring to us, and how much it brings to our customers and bankers alike. Because that's knowing and sense of reassurance is what makes deals happen. And so from our side of things today, we are always very open to have discussions. There's a huge aviation ecosystem, and I think Sharon and the team there with Regina as well. This is a very, very big ecosystem around aviation. Yes, we're involved in the aircraft piece. That's sort of the bit that everyone sees. But behind that, the talk about the airport developing, the systems that go into the airport, the spares, the servicing, this is all a huge infrastructure. And, we would certainly encourage that discussion and dialogue to go straight into Sharon and the team there and through to Mary and her team in Bahrain, when we're discussing these things. This really makes a lot of difference. Supporting that ecosystem is fundamental. And, from our side of things, we're always available to have discussions where we can support. But certainly Boeing Capital, from our standpoint, have enjoyed tremendous relationship with US EXIM, and long may that continue. But thank you for your time and opportunity just to impress today how we see US EXIM providing, ongoing great service and great opportunities for export, import, and developing harmonious and ongoing business relationships. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Vaskin. We appreciate your contribution to the conversation today, and we certainly appreciate Boeing's support of AmCham here in Bahrain, and we wish you the best. So we have just a few minutes left. I just wanted to ask a couple quick questions that I think would be useful. I saw, Sharon, that you've already replied to Tarek on his questions. So if a foreign company wants to buy US-made capital equipment, but they can't afford to pay for it, so what's the process for them entering into, using the EXIM trade tools in order to carry those receivables over a longer period of time so that they can afford to import those goods?
Well, I think the first most productive way would be to have the US supplier contact us directly. So it's going to be a little bit different for short-term versus medium-term. For a short-term transaction, we definitely want to talk to the supplier in the United States so that we can talk to them about a credit insurance policy to give credit terms to the buyer. In fact, that was the question that I was typing in and answering to Tarek, and that is that, we don't provide the money directly. It's on short term. It's the exporter that is giving you credit terms. So of course the buyers have to be credit worthy. We have to take a look at that. But on medium term, where you're buying capital equipment, the model would be as follows. You would contact your US supplier. The US supplier would get in touch with their local EXIM Bank representative. We would find out if their bank, who they have a relationship with, is involved in this program with EXIM Bank. And if so, we'll help that bank talk to the foreign buyer, get their financials, and get all the information that the bank would need to see if the buyer will qualify and would be able to service the amount of debt they're looking to take on to buy that capital equipment. So that's how the whole thing starts. Great,
thank you. So you mentioned that, so a US company feels that their buyer, their foreign buyer, is a good credit risk, and that's all been proven to be true by the paperwork and such, but that they're concerned about political climate or political risk. How does that work? And would COVID-19, and a foreign company that had been impacted by COVID, would it have been included under that insurance mitigation?
We are seeing a lot of credit insurance applications right now. Again, I'm going to go back to my comment that we're here to do what the private sector cannot or will not do. And that doesn't mean just the commercial banks. It also means the private sector credit insurers. And so there have been the private sector in general has pulled back on, made a prudent business decision to pull back on some of their credit lines. And so we are seeing applications from exporters during this difficult time. Some industries are much harder hit than others. It is a very difficult time, but EXIM Bank is doing whatever we can to make these transactions go forward in this time. So the credit insurance, I would say, would be interest is up, applications are up, and we're doing the best we can to support all exporters that want to make sales around the world.
Great, thank you. You had mentioned the rules of origin for the short-term and medium-term loans. 50% of the goods needed to be created in the United States, or up to 85%. Who measures that? Who determines the percentage of local origin?
Well, let's rephrase. That's an excellent question, which I thank you for. I think the way we want to think about it is who is responsible for determining US content. Okay, right. And that is going to fall on the actual exporter. I mean, Regina and Regina, I'll ask her to put her 2 cents in afterwards as well. More than 2 cents, but that's the phrase, right? So, we have to make sure that we give them the definition and that they are going to know what their inputs. If they're getting raw materials from overseas, that's going to be okay as long as the US labor is added, as long as we have in that individual product, this individual pen has to be at least 50% plus US content, including labor, excluding markup. So it has to, the onus has to fall on the exporter. They know their product, we don't know their product. Same thing for medium term. The only difference for medium term is that the definition is on the aggregate. In other words, on the full invoice, 85% of the invoice must be US content. It's not an item by item calculation. Regina, do you have anything to add there?
Yes, I do, Sharon, thanks. So with respect to the US content on the short-term side, and that is for the credit insurance and the working capital, it is the exporter who has to sign a disclosure. More often than not, their accountant will know their costs in terms of how they're split between the US piece and the foreign piece. And on the short-term side, EXIM will cover 100% of that transaction, assuming it all adds up to at least the 50. On the medium-term side, it's up to 85%, or the US content, 100% of the US content, whichever is lower. So if, let's say, it's 100% US made product, then the customer would come up with the 15%, and then we would finance up to 100% of the 85 or 85%. If, let's say, it's 70% US made, then the customer would come up with the 30% deposit, and EXIM would cover the 70 or 100% of the 70, if that makes sense. But the onus does fall on the exporter in terms of providing that information and really signing off on that. And that we can also assist. We have a policy and planning department, and I brought them in sometimes to assist the exporter with determining exactly what that US content is, so that they don't get in trouble somewhere down the line.
Thank you. Since we have the free trade agreement here, we're very aware of percentages and calculations of countries of origin. And with the global supply chain, it sometimes can be challenging to, but we're lucky with the free trade agreement, it's only 35% of country of origin. So a question, and I think I could even answer this, but do you offer credits to startups? I know you said that a company needed to be in business for 3 years. So I don't know if that eliminates what you would call a startup. Are there any countries of origin or citizenship status that matter in the decision making other than those 180 countries, or I don't know if it was 180, but the countries on your list? If you are a citizen of one of those countries, your membership or your company is located there and you're creditworthy, are you good to go?
Well, we don't really take into account citizenship at all. You know, EXIM Bank is looking at the underlying trade transaction. Do the products qualify vis-a-vis not military US content, as Regina so succinctly elaborated? Does the transaction qualify? Does the exporter qualify? Will the buyer qualify? We don't, you know, if the buyer is in Bahrain, and the purchase order is coming from ABC Company in Bahrain, and the commercial invoice is going to be cut to ABC Company in Bahrain, that's what we're looking at. We're making sure that all of the documents match, that the transaction is an eligible transaction, and that the buyer that there is a reasonable chance that the buyer is going to pay. You know, these are our tax dollars at work here in the United States. These are taxpayer paid programs. And while we try to be as aggressive, and I will use that word aggressive, and we try to be as aggressive as we can to support as many US transactions for exports going forward of US products, we have to make sure that the taxpayer dollars are protected. And if a buyer, you know, does not represent a reasonable assurance of repayment, there's a chance that we may not be able to support that transaction at that time. You know, maybe in 6 months when the financials come out or are approved. So we always have these little underwriting flexibilities that we can employ. As far as startups, that's going to be a little bit more difficult, but we are committed to helping startups in every way that we can. It could be possible that the owner of the startup has 20 years experience at his prior company. We're going to take that into consideration, okay? If a company is truly a startup, we are going to, Regina and I and our teams, we are going to make sure that that company gets all the tools that they need and all of the introductions to the various partners that we know. Small business development centers here in the United States are going to be key to help an exporter, you know, create a business plan and so on. The US Department of Commerce, unbelievable programs that they offer regarding buyer matchmaking, advocacy, and providing information on buyers, and many other entities as well, locally in your own market. So we're going to do as best we can for startups to get them to the point where they can take out an credit insurance policy and be supported by us.
Great. I recognize that we're a little bit over our time, but I want to ask one more question. So we've been talking a lot about capital goods and things that are made that you can hold or look at. What about services, you know, like engineering, consulting services, energy field services and such? Are those covered by EXIM?
So absolutely. We can offer an insurance policy to the exporter of those services. So when they make typically there'll be a contract for X number of years, but we don't cover the contract. What we cover are the progress billings made under the contract. The way services usually work is that services are rendered, and at the end of the month, an invoice is cut. And we will support the exporter against non-payment of that buyer on that invoice. So it would be a short-term credit insurance product for the support of standalone services as you've described.
Okay. I want to thank everyone who showed up for the call today. As we said, this presentation will be sent out to you. You'll have access to reach out to us at AmCham, to the embassy, certainly to EXIM with your questions. We're here for our members and for the local business community. And thank you very much, Sharon, for coming and presenting this information so clearly. Regina, Laskin, and the embassy, we just appreciate the partnership, the chamber. So thank you very much. We look forward to working together in the future to support U.S. companies.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Everyone, if you're
Thank you.
interested, yes, Kai.
Yeah, I'm saying since I visited EXIM's offices, I think a year and a half ago, probably, with Jennifer, EXIM has come a very long way. I see from what we were told then and what we see today. But congratulations for moving that fast and having a big area of services and support to the industry. So thank you again, and we look forward to having our members work with you going forward.